Yellowknife and the NWT, like any place, has social issues. But as I walk around downtown today, it seems more prevalent than it has in the past. I'm on a mission to find out why. My name is John Stanley, and this is the Storytime Podcast. All right, here we are with episode 2 of the Storytime Podcast. We have Robert Warburton here. Robert is a city councilor, but I'm going to let him tell you a little bit more about himself.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, John. Rob Warburton. I've done many things in town. The latest one is city council. I originally came north 2005 to do expedition raft guiding in the summers. I work construction in the winter. What else I've done here? Some expediting up here. And then I eventually got into, like most folks do, into territorial government. Worked in corrections for about a decade. Taught a lot of their self-defense, rest control, their kind of physical skills.
Now that I did not know.
Yeah,
that's good.
I was a recreation officer there, so I ran the rec programs for
Cool.
10 years, and I got into the training side of things. And then, and then my main job now is I do real estate. So I do residential, commercial, and a lot of advocacy around housing and kind of building a city and investing in your city. And a lot of that kind of led naturally to eventually city council. So that's like the synopsis, but that's
and actually I don't know if you remember this, but the first time I actually met you, you were actually coming to my house to buy lights from Olivia.
Yes.
And I had been home that day, and I happened to, you came in. And again, it goes to show you, like you never know when you see somebody who you're talking to, kind of thing. Because I was like, oh, this guy looks like a little handyman kind of guy and whatnot. But little did I know you had properties all throughout the city, and you've been managing properties throughout the city. You actually managed the building that my I don't know how that actually works. I know that you're kind of the management group, I guess, that's in control of the building where Blunt is right now, my wife's salon. And and I know you've just recently purchased some properties as well, refurbished the old hotel here that had a very, very seedy reputation, we'll say. And I'm happy to see that, quite honestly. I think it's a great move. So maybe you can even tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my company, Cloudworks, have had that since 2014. I just recently bought out all the partners in that one. So now it's just my wife and I. And then as part of that, this last couple of years, we did a couple duplexes, kind of small investment things. But recently, we just purchased the Northern Lights Motel. That's how most folks will know it. It's the local seedy downtown motel. Yeah. And the plan there is, we are changing it over to, instead of motel, it'll be 26 bachelor apartments with a bunch of common areas spaced downstairs.
That's so needed here too. And like I actually saw some of the pictures on Facebook of the rentals that you have done, and it looked great. Like it does, yeah. And I mean, a lot of people don't realize, if you're not from the Northwest Territories, you can't even rent a bedroom here. It's roughly about $900 a month just to rent a bedroom in a house. So having the opportunity to have a bachelor type facility like that for a single person is great, because it's quite costly. I mean, a one bedroom apartment probably goes for about $1,800 a month now.
Depending on how nice it is, $1,800 to $200 a month.
Yeah, so
we're in a, as we talked about before, John, we're in a housing crisis, right? We have a lack of stuff. There's a lot of talk around affordable housing, which is super important, but we lack everything. So, we can't get healthcare workers because there's no housing, and we can't get servers in restaurants because there's no affordable housing. So there's just nothing in the whole spectrum. Doing that motel was, I get two reactions. I get one like you, which is like, oh, that's great. And then I get the other half, which is like, because it has a, like I said, seedy reputation in town. So changing that narrative will take a while, but
oh, for sure, of course. I mean, like I've heard people refer to it as the crack motel and whatever.
It's been all those things.
Yeah, and it has been, exactly. It's been. But I mean, just seeing someone doing something positive with it, and it's interesting that we talked about the fact that healthcare workers, because we are in. I mean, some of the things that we really need to exist in everyday life right now, we're struggling with. We don't have enough healthcare workers. We don't have enough staff for our businesses. But the root causes to a lot of that, and are simple things like housing. Like I had a meeting there a little while ago with a bunch of daycare providers. Right? No one thinks about daycares, but some of them had turned away as many as 50 families. So you have 50 at least 50 families out there that can't get childcare for their children. And that's scary when you think about it.
Yeah, like I remember when I first came here in 2005, like, getting a job with the territorial federal government, it was hard to do. It was the golden ticket everybody wanted. Now they got huge vacancy, right? They're over a quarter vacant in the territorial government in general. Healthcare workers over 40%, right? You just can't give away jobs. Corrections, where I worked for 10 years, that's a high school diploma and 8-week training course. Can't staff it.
They're on a heavy
right?
recruit now, yeah.
It's been heavy recruit for years. The North is not the attractive place it once was. But the mentality, I noticed in a lot of employers hasn't shifted yet. It's going to be interesting. And the big part is around cost of living and housing, right?
Absolutely.
We have really constrained housing for a long time. So the motel is part of how I'm physically doing it. But for years I've been pushing for, reasonable and rational ways of doing housing. A lot of time we get in our own way. So I know a recent one is before I got in council, I was on the Community Advisory Board on Homelessness, which is federal dollars through COVID for rapid housing went through the city. So the city had a committee which would kind of deploy that money. And there's an apartment building in town. It's 36 units. It's called Aspen Apartments. Federal government owns it.
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
And it's been vacant forever. And fighting the red tape and the bureaucracy and the narrative around that property has been frustrating. It's going to go to council here for approval for that committee soon. But it's it looks like we're going to get it from the feds and then move it into affordable housing. But the fact that I and a number of folks had to fight to get an empty building.
Yeah,
and
that's sitting there anyway.
It was because unfortunately we've been kind of, I don't know if it's trained or we have this narrative that it's got to be the perfect thing, but good is so perfect enemy of good here. Does it have issues? Yes. Does it need repairs? Yes. But it's there. It's free, and existing is of huge value.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but this idea that everyone wants a brand new shiny thing. Oh, sure, I want a brand new shiny thing, but we don't live in that world, right? So it's been an interesting couple of years trying to change that narrative on let's just do good enough, and then we can work on the perfect.
You can build
right?
it as time goes on. We can improve things.
Yeah, because that's how business works, right? It's how life works, right? It's it's rarely the finished version right from the start, but it seems to be the narrative a lot when it comes to around housing here, especially when we get into affordable housing and kind of more subsidized side of things.
That's interesting, actually, because one of the things, I know you guys just had a meeting there a little while ago, and I saw the article on it, and of course one of the areas that's been improved for development is actually behind my house in Niven, and the first thing that comes to my mind is people start talking about their views and all this kind of stuff, but the reality of it is you got to look at it from a community perspective, and sure, I like my view, but the reality of it is I look out my window a couple times a day, if that. And what I really like, though, is having a hospital and people in it to staff it. And everyone says, well, why can't we got all this land? But, we don't have the infrastructure for it. We have a very limited area where we have actual water and sewer available. I mean, if you go out into the Cam Lake area and the old Airport Road area there's nothing there either. So if they haven't run pipe and plumbing out there at this point, well, why do you think that is, guys? It's got to be an affordability issue, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, so this is where the one of the rare cases where we're not unique in the North. Every city ever in North America, we have gone out. For decades we've built single family neighborhoods, and that's I live in a single family house. I'm guilty as everybody else, but that when we look at we started doing some really good asset management and start looking at the cost of these things. Yeah. So the cost of your water, your sewer, your roads. That model of sprawl going out is financially unsustainable. It is just not. It's that housing never pays for itself. And then as we get in a larger deficit infrastructure here, we've got to be real. We can't afford.
Exactly.
I would love to have sprawling acreages for everybody.
Absolutely.
I would love that, but it's just I'd be ignoring reality if that's what we continue to do as a development pattern, right? So a lot of there was a lot of folks that are very passionate about kind of infilling those spaces. So City Hall, the administration brought forward 4 areas to kind of infill.
It makes sense.
Infill meaning using existing infrastructure, so water, sewer, roads, to add more land for to build housing without adding more infrastructure. It works better. It's still not perfect, but
well, it makes sense. I mean, at the end of the day, we have it's there. If it's gonna, I imagine the cost is the difference between the costs is astronomical, and people have to realize that it's like when they talked about putting the school, everyone was very upset about Tin Can Hill, and I get it. Tin Can Hill's a great place. We want to walk around Tin Can Hill. We want to let our dogs loose and all that kind of thing. But the reality of it is when I look at it, okay, well, we have an opportunity here to keep our kids in the north, the ones that are going to school now. They don't have to go to Lethbridge if we get this school in place. They can stay here if they want to. We can bring people in and attract people to the community based on the fact that we can provide the school something that's that has the program that they want. It's a small area. You can access everything by foot, and you got a nice location as well. So it's a pretty place. It's something that it's a unique experience for someone going to university or going to school. It makes way more sense. And people say, well, this will put it downtown. Well, we know why we can't put it downtown. There's a lot of things that need to be fixed in the community, and I mean, we certainly can't put it out in Cam Lake or any of those areas because that's not within walking distance. So you've got to be logical about it. And I live, like I said, I live in Niven, and behind me is I think it's the cross country ski. So my area, they've essentially said, well, it's for future development, but I mean that could happen at any time. And then right next to it is a spot that's going to be, I looked at the map the other day, and I mean it just makes sense. I mean at the end of the day, I don't like the idea of having houses behind me, but reality is again, I'd like to have hospitals and people to staff them, and we have to have somewhere for them to live. Right?
Yeah, no, and I get that. Like folks don't want things to change, but like we change or you die, right? Like that's like it's
it has to grow. I mean,
housing. There's a lot of conversation around. It's a supply issue, right? Like the reason housing is tight is because there's not enough of it. So we have to build it somewhere. And then I'm glad you brought up downtown and the university. Kind of ties in. Is like there's a very big difference between publicly owned land. So Tin Can Hill is publicly owned. City owns that. And privately owned land, which is downtown. Right? So the tools the city has to do those things it's apple and oranges, right? I agree. I would love to, like, all my life savings are invested in downtown. The CD Motel is downtown. Yeah. Ex-CD Motel. But I would love nothing more than downtown to really kind of grow and get redeveloped. But it's privately owned dirt. So the tools the city has are very different than for dirt they own, right? So they can do different things. So we can incentivize, like the city's going to be working on their incentive bylaw here next year. So we're told that's going to come forward. So like what tools and mechanisms can we use to encourage privately owned land to be redeveloped into something else? But we can't make people do that.
Well, of course,
it's private, and it's a bit of that Tin Can Hill conversation is, folks are really upset because they weren't talked to. It was kind of dropped them with 2 weeks notice. And I agree, like the public was not consulted correctly, but that wasn't a city consultation. The territorial government brought that to the city.
Right.
It is on as the person doing the project, it is on them to do that, right? We don't get involved until we get asked, right? So there's a bit of a misunderstanding about who
I
does
think
what
people
there.
really get confused as well. Like, and that's something that as I've gotten a little bit into the politics of the territories, it's like people get confused with what's a city responsibility, what's a territorial responsibility.
So it's upsetting for folks, but like take out the fact that it's territorial government. Say it was Joe Schmo developer. The process is exactly the same from a city point of view, right? I would love university. I would also have loved if they had actually asked people and not just dropped it with 2 weeks notice.
For sure.
But like that's not. It is on them to consult as part of that process as we go through it. But yeah, so the public-private ownership thing, like here, I'll put university downtown, right? Same way I can't tell a territorial government as a city where to put something. Same as a developer. Someone comes to me and says, I want to build on my lot I own here. I don't go, well, that's great, but why don't you build over here? It's not.
Yeah.
It is yes or no to the thing they're asking, right? That's as a regulator, that's how a city works. But there's also some things that we don't do, right? Like we don't have, people sit on empty, poorly used land all the time in Yellowknife, and so we have incentives which haven't been working, so we're trying to fix those. But we also don't really have right now any sticks. We have nothing to kind of like, here's the sweetener, but here's the consequence because those vacant or poorly used chunks of dirt. The problem with those is that means that everyone else pays more taxes because those aren't used better, right?
Right.
You don't have housing, right? There's a community consequence to a private poor use of land. Yeah. So, how do we incentivize that better, which is my preference. But also I think we need to work on like the sticks. Those are harder because those require change in legislation and all kinds of other things. But we're just kind of I want to focus on both for the next couple of years.
Well, yeah. And I mean, like I know, through conversations I've had with a few people that are involved in property development here, and like the mall is as an example here is a great. It's no one wants to do anything with it, and the owners are not here, and to them I think it's kind of a write off for them. Great. This is a great tax break at the end of the year. We got all this property sitting vacant, but it's property that could be used. It's property that there's nothing happening there. It's empty. When years ago that was a vibrant mall, but now it's an empty wasteland for the most part, right? There's a few stores in there that are doing well, but I mean, there's a lot of empty space in there as well. And the parking lots are empty, the 50-50 parking lot, because I know that was a conversation that came up, and there was talks of developing that. And and I mean, it's a weird situation in that mall anyway, because it's divided by two different owners, and so when you hit the staircase, you're not dealing with the same person anymore. So it's a little complicated, right? But yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of property down there that could be made and could be put to good use, right?
Well, and this is the other part of the kind of like downtown and kind of landlord conversation here, is there's two completely different universes of operators in Yellowknife. So most cities have mostly privately owned and then a bit of institutional ownership. Yellowknife's odd in that, like, residential space, for example, like almost 3/4 of our rental stock is owned by two companies, right? Large institutional investors. That is a weird, disproportionate mix. Most places don't have that kind of density of ownership. So we have to, when we talk about like incentives and kind of sticks and these things, I think what's often not talked about is like this reality of these two completely different universes. So the things that motivate me, like I am, things have to pay for themselves very quickly. Like there's not, whereas if you're dealing with like a large, say, publicly traded REIT, right, we're a rounding error on their spreadsheet. So the way these two things are treated are apples and oranges, but we tend to try to lump them all together when we're talking about policies and processes and bylaws, and they're not motivated the same ways.
No.
Right. So but you try to acknowledge that. I've had some conversations at territorial level the last couple of years, and you mention that, people get squirmy, right? They're like, "Oh, we got you everybody the same." It's like, you can't, because they're not
It's a major
motivated
corporation.
the same.
It's not exactly the same at all.
They're not, and they're not evil. People often assign like evil narratives to these large REITs and corporate owners. They're just, it is, that's a capitalist conversation. But at the heart, they're just a financial vessel, right? And they are motivated by financial consequences or incentives, right?
They have shareholders. They have, So.
Whereas like I'm motivated by those things too, but I'm also like, I want to improve my city. I want to make things better, right? So I will do things that have kind of that moral or feeling side of things as well as the financial, whereas they are purely financially focused. And so you have to incentivize them in ways that match that. So we saw it like City of Yellowknife had like a $250,000 bill they gave to one of these REITs because they had fire pulls.
Okay.
In 1 month, they had about a $250,000 bill from the city for call-outs for the fire guys because someone kept pulling the alarms, right?
Yeah.
And so what they did is, somebody on some spreadsheet somewhere went, "Oh wow, that's a huge bill." They had private security. They partnered with local housing corporation. Like they fixed, like they addressed the problem, but they don't do it proactively. They do it reactionary, right? Because it costing too much.
Yeah.
So knowing that, you just got to create a kind of that feedback loop that gives them that feedback that it's more expensive to do nothing than to. But folks don't. People's heads, it's all one big lump. Landlord is all put together.
For sure, and I mean, I see. You go on a rant and rave pages or anything in town, and I don't ever post on them, but I like to read them sometimes for entertainment. And you'll see one particular company, which I won't name, but they, they take a lot of heat on there, and they don't realize that they complain about the local people are just employees. At the end of the day, this is a major corporation, and that's where the separation is. And you have a building here, you're the owner, you're in town. I can communicate with you directly and say, okay, you are the guy. When I'm talking to this person really, in truth, doesn't have a ton of power, right? Like they're answering to a much bigger office up above, and again, it the truth is this particular company is coast to coast, and they can take a loss, and a lot of times it's to their benefit to do so in particular areas. So I mean, it's not that they're, like you said, it's not that they're an evil corporation, but they have shareholders and they have people. At the end of the day, they want to turn a profit, and if they don't turn a profit, then we're going to get a tax write-off from it. We're going to get the benefits that way. But sometimes having a property sit vacant makes no sense. Like I've gone in and we went into a couple properties here a few years back, and we were looking at maybe expanding the gym into a bigger space, and the rates that they wanted were outlandish. But I was like, why aren't you willing to negotiate? Because they don't care at the end of the day, because it's more beneficial to keep the property vacant than it is to have me rent it at a lower rate.
Yeah, and it's like we're talking commercial versus residential. This is the other part, like most people don't. So residential is like that's all market, right? Like what is the market rent for a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom? So commercial, the entire value in commercial is in Yellowknife or in general is based on the revenue it makes.
Yeah.
So if something's, I don't know, pick a number. Say it's $20 a square foot to rent a gym space. That's cheap, but say it's $20, and their space is empty. If they say, okay, well I'll do $10 a square foot to get it full, sure, they're going to fill it up, but they're going to smash their value way down, right? So
Big
like
time.
the book value changes, and corporations' book values matter, right?
Absolutely.
Now, to me, Joe Schmo Rob here, right?
You just want you need the
I
rent.
need to fill it up, and then
Yeah.
I'll work on the revenue, right?
Yeah.
So like my motivations are very different than like
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense.
local, small versus large institutional.
Yeah.
But I'm getting like really weedy and nuanced here. Like most people don't care about that, right? They want their stuff to be, you know, well, folks say affordable, but then all of a sudden, you know, depending who you talk to, that definition is very gray, right? So,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that because it's like the conversation that I had, you know, with respect to the daycares the other day, and I was just talking to a couple of providers and whatnot, and you know, people know there's a daycare shortage, and they know that obviously we need childcare, but a lot of times people don't go deeper than that. They don't know why, what's causing the issue, where the issues, what's causing these people to close, where are they having difficulties, you know, is it funding related, you know, is it the way that things were rolled out from, you know, they don't look at the deeper picture. Like you said, they look at the number. Okay, why is my apartment $1,900 a month and it's small? Like, you know, why am I paying this much for a little apartment? But there's reasons for all of it at the end of the day if you want to get a little bit deeper and why these property owners, I guess, kind of act the way they do. And you know, you're, like I said, you're a great example because you're a local guy. So like you said, you want to rent your properties. It's important for you to get people in those spaces because obviously you want revenue, you know?
Well, and then like speaking on the I think the average person realizes like how it is really hard to build things. Like it is really, really hard and really a lot of risk to build something, right?
Absolutely.
And our focus tends to be on big things. You know, so we have some local big developers that have been doing apartments lately. Got some proposals on some city-owned lots, 50-50 lot. Again, large corporations, 180 unit buildings. Like these are $40-50 million projects, right?
Yeah.
These are not local. They're just on a scale which is beyond us. So what I want to focus on next couple of years is like that stuff's great. Like you have incentives and processes for that to attract those scale developers. But that's not the only developer, right? I would love, and I'm going to work on some ideas here next year or two. Like, how can we incentivize, you know, you to put a house, like a layaway house behind your house? How can I get you to build a basement suite? You know, how can I get you to, you know, if you're kind of a little bigger than your home, but you're a local person, maybe buying a property, making it a fourplex. Like, how do I incentivize like a lot of local, small, incremental, frankly unsexy development, right? Because that's how cities have traditionally been built, right? That's how you have local ownership. That's how people giving a shit about their stuff.
Yeah.
Is you make it locally owned, but it's got to be a scale that works. And right now, there's a lot of, there's a lot of bureaucratic kind of reasons why it doesn't work. There's also a lot of barriers cost-wise, right? It's a system set up for large developers, not for local small folks, right? So how do we remove some of those barriers through some smaller things? And hopefully next couple of months, I'm going to bring some motions forward to the city council. We'll see if people are of interest. Kind of how we can change things like building bylaws and incentives, and like how can we make it so it matches the reality of the average person that wants to do a small project, right?
Well, we've got to make changes at the end of the day when you think about it, because, you know, I saw, I guess someone had, you know, made some comments in respect to this. Well, back in the day, you know, when the mines were here, they you know, they wanted to build all this housing, and then it ended up being vacant. But at the end, right now, that's irrelevant because we have a crisis now. We have people with no places to live. We need employees and staff, and we need healthcare workers and government workers and whatever. We need to bring them in here, and we need to incentivize them coming here, because, you know, the reality of it is when you look at if I'm a healthcare worker, if I'm a nurse, I get a lot of options.
Yeah.
So I have to have a reason to want to come here. And you know, at the end of the day, if you can't provide me with the basics, how could you possibly think that you're going to attract me to come and, you know, to move to the north? It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, you need to, you know, to have like the full spectrum of stuff for folks, right? The other part that you know, I'm going to bring up some stuff around workforce housing in the next couple weeks here, because right now, like we don't have a big enough labor pool in the north to build all the stuff we need to build, right? There's a reason all these companies bring in out of town workers, right? It's just we don't have capacity locally to build enough stuff. So what you're seeing, you know, like Avens is being built. That's a couple hundred workers. Giant Mine, they're putting a water treatment plant. That's going to start with 50 and ramp up to over 150 workers to build that. Hundreds of workers when Giant reaches kind of peak remediation. like where these people go, right?
Reclamation is going to be a big thing in the future, right?
So, so traditionally, what we do is they would rent. We'd have a healthy enough vacancy rate. They rent some apartments, or they put some hotels for shorter term guys. Hotels are full with like they're full during peak season, and we have no housing, right? So, and currently we don't allow work camps in the city of Yellowknife for some crazy reason. So, in addition to like the local pressure just to house people locally, we got a ton of like mobile workforce coming through town in the next couple of years, and it's just ramping up. That's also now competing for housing. So, addressing it is not one thing. It's like we've got to address it in multiple ways through multiple things. This is where I love city politics. Is I think if the city can't affect a lot of things, but housing is literally why it exists, right? It is there to like regulate and facilitate development of land. That's one of the core functions of the city, right? Water, sewer, make sure everything is garbage, but it's all servicing housing and property, right?
Yeah.
So this is where the city can really can move the needle on this stuff, but unfortunately it's not, everyone wants the big 50-50 lot development. Those are, call them silver bullets in the development world. Everybody wants those, but it's all these small little incremental changes over time, which you don't really notice or aren't really sexy, but that's how you like add rental units and you get local ownership, and that's how you build that over time.
Absolutely. It makes perfect sense. And people, but like you said, the problem I guess is, and you see this in a lot of the issues that we're having right now, is that people don't like change. They don't like the idea of change. Like even, and this is again, I keep going back to the daycares because it was a thing that was kind of a on my radar now, because I was I didn't realize that these issues existed. And one of the things that someone had said to me was, in Saskatchewan, if you have a day home, you can hire somebody, and then you can have double the your customer kind of thing. And what a simple thing to do. We already have you have 30 or 40 daycares here in the city, or day homes I should say, and then your major daycares. But if you could just allow that, and it's not allowed, they can't do it here. They can't do it because of the way the regulations are set up, right? And I had no idea about that. They can't do it. So you're only allowed to have 5 people within the space, and families are being turned down left, right, and center. They don't have daycare. There's going to be economic effects that come from that, obviously. I mean, I can't go to work if I can't, have kids. I have to stay home and take care of them. I can't just leave my 2-year-old at home by herself and say have a good day, right? So
one of my kids are young and 7 and 5, and I was walking to school yesterday and talking to one of the dads I see at drop off there. And I used to, he used to work in town here. And I was like, oh, how's that going? He goes, he's like, I quit. I was like, why? He's like, I was working full time and I was paying for daycare. Yep. He's like, so I quit. I'll just stay home. So, so we lost somebody that was filling a critical job because daycare costs were too expensive.
And the thing is, the subsidy's great. The federal government to come out with this subsidy and everything else, but that helps the individual. It doesn't help the provider, right? You know what I mean? So there's a lot, and a provider, of course, if you want a day home, and you allow the subsidy to be used in your day home, you sign up for it, you can't raise your prices now more than 2.3% a year.
Yeah, it's like it's made it good for the end user is the idea.
Yeah.
But it's done it, it's taken away the market for day homes, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, people aren't doing they take care of our kids, and this is an incredibly important job, but they're not doing it for free, right? This is their job. Yeah. So now you've taken away the ability for them to adjust as the market adjusts.
Well, imagine a business where you run a business and they say, well, you can only have this many customers, and as well, you can't charge more than this.
Yeah. Well, I run residential properties. This has come up before, right? I mean, it's like you'll hear every couple of years, or someone bring up, well, rent control. Yeah. The answer to a limited supply is to then limit the return on that supply, so you remove the interest for people to invest in it, right? It's a supply issue. It's like idea we'll cap the profit, and that's the problem. No, the issue with daycares is there's not enough of them. The issue with housing is there's not enough of them.
And where's the incentive? And where's the incentive to open a daycare or open a day home if you know that you're going to have these issues?
Yeah, right? And I know people people have issues with the idea of for-profit housing, right? Like, this is a capitalist system we live in. It is not perfect, but it is the system we work in. If you look at housing, even Yellowknife is a good example. It is not built by government. It is built by private industry. It has been forever, right? All the big developments you're seeing in town right now, it's all private industry. You can debate, you can agree or disagree on that as a structure of homeownership, but that is what we have, right? So how do we attract that investment to build more housing? And it's and there is like non-market models. Like you got like the co-op, you got Borealis Co-op, what's the other co-op in town. So if folks do want to do housing in a non-market way, there's ways of doing it. But that's hard too, right?
Well,
Because
yeah.
you get organized people get together, right? Like I said, there's no one answer here. There's like multifaceted answers.
No, and I mean the reality of it is I mean, no, you're right. Nobody likes the idea of housing for profit, but and that is the reality. I mean, and the idea, the utopian idea of socialism and everyone's going to live and we're all going to live equally, and that just doesn't exist. And it's been attempted in a lot of places, in my opinion, and it hasn't been overly successful, right? Not to say that socialism can't be successful at all. I mean, I'm sure there's a way to do it if we do it correctly. I mean, but I guess what I'm getting at is while while I like the idea, I don't like the idea of anyone not having a place to live. I mean, that's the issue here. And we can talk about affordability and all that kind of stuff down the road, but right now we need to get houses built, we need to get apartments built, we need to get housing and have it available. And then the more, I guess, the reality of it is the more property that's available, then the prices will regulate themselves at some point in time.
Well, it's supply and demand, right? So we had, I can't remember the exact year, 2014, 2015. We had a healthy vacancy rate. I think it's 5 or 7%. I'm just spitballing here. I can't remember exact numbers. But I know one of the large corporate REITs here internally had like 17% vacancy.
Yeah.
They spent over $50 million that summer on improving their stuff because some bean counter was like, oh, revenues are dropped, let's invest some capital, right?
Yeah.
So like vacancy is not, like I know there's some recent articles, folks like, oh, we're gonna have 12% vacancy once we finish all these units. That's high vacancy is not a bad thing, right?
Nope.
It puts pressure down on prices. But it also means that if you run good properties, and you're not a horrible person to deal with, people like I've never had a problem renting a place out. Even when we had higher vacancy, never had a problem because people would naturally leave the garbage, right?
If you have a good property, it's going to rent.
Yeah. And then what that does is incentivizes the highly vacant garbage to then not to fix itself, right? Everyone assumes that property owners want low vacancy. I don't. I actually want high vacancy, right? It makes the market better and more robust, right? It's better for everybody.
Well, I mean, the slumlords exist in a lot of these cities because there's no availability at the end of the day, and you have no incentive to improve your property, and that's what it comes down to. And like you said, I mean, the instant that there was a vacancy, okay, well, let's put some money into these, let's get these properties up to scratch, and that's competition is a good thing in a lot of ways, right?
And I'm okay with it. But right now, we need supply, right? We need stuff. I know, like the conversation that came to city council around infill. Previous councils had similar conversations around Avens, right? People don't like change. And this is not personal against people. We have, since the Second World War, we have held up single family homes in low density. Like that's the ideal, right? We've been like trained.
Yeah.
And the idea that we can build a fully formed community right from the get go and having never change, that's not how we've lived for hundreds of years. That's post World War II. Right? This idea of building a completely finished community all in one go and then just leaving it. But then it sits there static. And the fact it doesn't change is what I would argue the reason why it's not sustainable, right? Communities change over time, right? That's, a new shiny place is great. Then it kind of starts reaching the end of its economic life, 30, 40, 50 years. Then people convert things to duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes. So they knock it over and they build an apartment building. Like this is the natural evolution of
it just starts to happen
communities,
gradually,
right?
yeah.
But we've stopped that. We've had that in stasis for decades because of our zoning and our bylaws and different rules federally and financing rules and all this stuff. So that's shifting slowly. So City of Yellowknife has, the new zoning bylaw they brought in a year and a half, 2 years ago, which really kind of removed a lot of the zoning barriers or the reasons why you couldn't use your property the way you wanted. Now, I know everyone was scared overnight you'd have a strip club beside your house. That's not how markets work, right?
Yeah.
It just means over time now we can let communities, these areas of town and communities change as they naturally want to, right? As the market incentivizes it. But before you couldn't. It was just like locked in amber, right? Like this single family house was stuck single family no matter if that was viable or not. So.
Well, no, that's true because I mean, if you look at like I'm originally from St. John's, but I grew up in like a suburb of St. Well, it's not. I apologize for that. It's not a suburb. It is a city itself. Mount Pearl is a city. I don't want to get in trouble here. But I grew up in Mount Pearl, which is like you there's no break. Like you drive from Mount Pearl into St. John's, and everybody all in Mount Pearl, all there is single family homes. Like that's what you grew up with. That's the way it is. But when if you watch St. John's, it's an old city, and I mean you can see the changes happening downtown. Like you said, houses start to disappear, buildings start to go up. duplexes, triplexes, whatever. But it changes as time goes on. As the population adjusts, you need to adjust for it. And not everybody can afford a single family home, and that's the reality. I mean, what's the average for a single family home here right now in Yellowknife?
I have no idea.
I mean, a trailer is running anywhere from 4 to, 5.5 million, right? Or I'm sorry, $500,000. So you get $500,000 for a trailer. I mean, a townhouse is running for roughly about $600,000. So I mean, they're not cheap, right? And if you're a young person, that's tough. So you're going to end up renting, and that's the reality. And then what's available rental wise? I mean, again, if there's no incentive, there's no new properties, and there's no incentive to kind of improve the ones that are there, we're going to pay a lot of money for a property that's not that great.
Yeah, and then so folks folks have been putting in rental suites and stuff forever, right? Or nanny suites, which is, if you ever see a listing that says nanny suite, that's code for like not permitted rental suite.
Yeah.
But like people are doing it anyway. So like the changes like the city did in the zoning bylaw, it's just, and people got really angry. Oh, I can have a sixplex beside me. And it's like, well, you probably have like a half dozen illegal units around you anyway. Like
for sure you do.
It's making something easier to do, so people do it properly and they permit it and they do it, above board versus kind of. People assume that if something's not allowed, it doesn't happen. It's not true. If people want to do it, it just happens.
Well, it's like home renovations. I mean, how many people don't get permits to do their home renovations?
Yeah,
I mean,
because they just so just making sure you're matching what people are actually doing with their homes, right? Most people now want a rental suite in their house to help pay for it, right? Yeah. And making that easier to do and approachable as opposed to hard to do.
Well, housing's not. I mean, if you look at housing, it's not a buyer or a seller's market right now, because we've got the prices of the homes are going down, the interest rates are going up, so it's kind of an ugly time.
Yeah.
To be in the market for a home in reality, right?
Well, and so this is, folks like, oh, good, there's pressure down on housing prices, which is great, right? But what it also does is it removes a lot of the incentive to build anything because interest rates are high, folks can't make projects work, right? This is why, like, going back to the sexy incremental getting a mom and pop to build stuff, because they're not as sensitive, right? Like some of these big projects we heard proposed downtown. I'll be surprised a lot of those happen. I have no inside knowledge on those, by the way. This is just me like looking outside in. With interest rates moving that fast, when you get projects of those scales, like a couple interest points
makes a huge
difference, right?
Yeah.
They don't do things that are, it's long-term stuff. It's not, so the volatility is too high. So getting those big projects to go is going to be really hard next couple of years until things kind of figure themselves out. Yeah. But Joe Schmo doesn't care about 2 or 3 interest rate points. In fact, interest rates go up, people are more incentivized to do rental suites, right? Because they want to offset cost of living.
For sure.
So yeah, working on that side of things.
Well, it makes sense. It does. And just as an example, like a friend of mine, he owns a bunch of properties in Toronto. And one of his properties, the mortgage was roughly about $1,800 a month. So he just had to refinance, because his mortgage came to term, and now that mortgage is $3,500 a month. And I think it was roughly about $136. He said that would actually be going against the principal, the remainer's interest. So when you look at that, I mean, now if someone was in because we all went out and bought homes based on the interest rates were low, and we can spend a little bit more money. Well, now they're in a situation where if things continue as they are, okay, well now my mortgage is about to double. Can I afford that? It puts people in a lot of people in a bad situation, right?
Yeah. This is where you do like macro and kind of local economics. So like macro, the Bank of Canada is setting interest rates to try to cool off inflation, right? And it seems to be working. But this is the real consequence to me and you and average folks that own homes is you're gonna have to stop eating out so much. You're gonna have to stop. Maybe like guy I talked about, like he quit his job and just stayed home and take care of his kid because that was cheaper, right?
Or do what the deputy prime minister said and get rid of your Disney Plus account.
Oh.
But but where I was going with that though, Rob, was like this, so I have a basement, and if my mortgage doubled tomorrow, I might be incentivized to take that basement and turn it into a basement suite or do to offset the pricing, right? Like it just makes sense when you think about it, right? Like it's something that's doable, and nobody wants to pay. Or, some people just aren't capable of paying, double their mortgage, and it's a reality that could hit people very hard in the next few years. And a lot of people, I think, aren't thinking about that. We're headed into some tough economic times.
Yeah, and this is where, like, again, the North is an oddity. We're very government heavy, so
we're a little insulated, eh?
A little, sort of. So like I know, like you brought up the folks talking about, when the mines closed last time, people walked away from their houses. There's lots of vacant homes in Yellowknife. But we were primarily at that point in time the by far and away largest employer was Giant and Con back then.
For
right?
sure, yeah.
By far and away largest employer now is government,
is the
right?
government.
So it's federal, territorial, and city. Grossly disproportionate compared to even mine jobs right now, right? Mines are a huge part of our economy and a huge part of GDP, which we're going to feel as they wind down. But is different? Is it completely different economy than it was in 1992?
Well, a lot of those
right?
people don't live in the city. That's the reality. A lot of those workers that are in those mines are flying out in Edmonton.
And it's Diavik has been very proactive in talking about kind of their wind down in 2025 and the local impact. Now we're all guesstimating, but they're the best. They hired some really good folks, and they did a big presentation. It was public a year ago, I think, and it was about kind of number impact on Yellowknife. And they figure, and it's like not just employees, but like people that will move because employees are gone. They figure 500 people, 600 people less will live in Yellowknife based on that mine closing. So Divik's a huge mine, right? It's a massive mine site. But say 21,000 people, estimate 500 people will leave, right? That's not good, right?
No.
Like when we can't lose people. That's not like half our city, right?
No.
Whereas back when we had Giant and Con closing,
that was massive.
It was massive amounts of people. So I don't know what's going to happen when they close or what economically is going to occur, but it's an apple and orange. It is a different economic situation than it was then, right? The drivers are different. So we got to think of it differently. We can't just make assumptions like, oh, it's going to go super vacant once, right?
Yeah, I don't think it will. I mean,
No,
not like you said, 500 people. Yeah, I mean, we're trying to grow, but at the end of the day, 500 people is not going to. Certainly not. Yeah. It's not 50%, like you said.
And then folks are talking about our population hasn't really grown. Like why? Like what's all this housing demand coming from? All this pressure from out of town workers. That's a big part. That's a big chunk of it right now. But the other part is like we're changing, right? The average household's like 2 people versus 4 people 20 years ago. We're aging, so people, there's just a lot of shifts happening on how we live. So it's not just numbers. Like numbers is just one part of it. But now I'm getting like super weedy, and most people they don't want to hear that, right?
But it's the truth though,
Yeah.
and that's the reality. We do have an aging population, right? Birth rates are big time down. I mean, right across the country, and again, you're gonna people are shifting into retirement. You've got people coming out now that can't afford to buy a home. I mean, again, like we've got people here that work for us here that are in their early 20s and whatnot. I mean, a home's a long way off from them for buy a home. I mean, if you want to buy a $600,000 home, you got to have at least $60,000 plus you got to have the income to.
Well, and this is the other part of like making it easier to do things in your house is like, say you're a retiree, your kids can't afford a house, so you're getting this multi-generational living happening again, right? So people are living together longer. So how do you have multiple living in the same property, right? You do convert a house, or you put a laneway house in, or there's ways of changing things which don't. Everyone talks about character of a neighborhood. What they really mean is they don't want it to change.
Yeah.
It is changing, and it's just like how do we make that as easy as possible, so people will stay, right?
Well, I mean, this city's changing one way or the other. I mean, there's a lot of issues that have I mean, I know for me, I've been here 12 years, and I've seen it. Like our homelessness situation is a great example. I mean, it's always existed, but it's been quite magnified, right? And again, one of the issues, obviously, we can talk about addictions and all that kind of stuff, but one of the issues that comes up repeatedly when you talk to people that are homeless or people that are struggling like that is affordable housing. And again, how can we create affordable housing if there's such a huge demand and we don't have the stock, we don't have the ability to meet that demand, right?
Yeah, there's and like the issues we're having around like vulnerable people and homelessness. I wish we were unique, but we're not.
No,
like
absolutely
this
not.
is like every city is starting to grapple with this. And what is it? It's cost of living, it's the income inequality, it's this uneven distribution and supply, right? So yeah, if can't do much as Joe Schmo city councilor, but if anything, if we can kind of get the supply of housing going, that's one particular part of it. It's not going to solve homelessness, but it can hopefully
it's a piece though.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the reality. I mean, when I look at all the problems that I see around the community, and I'm like you, I want to help my community. I want to make changes, and that's why I've gotten interested in politics and want to get involved. But the reality of it is there's no button we're going to push to solve any of these issues. We have to kind of chip away at them as we go along, and we may never completely solve them, but we can improve the situation, whether that's homelessness or housing or whatever it is. I mean, we have to make steps to do it, and a lot of times people don't want to make those steps because, like you said, they don't they don't like change. But we have to change and we have to adapt if we're going to survive as a community. And we have to stop. I guess at the end of the day, we have to stop looking at just how things affect us and how they affect our community as a whole, right?
Well, this is the conversation we had around infill, right? Everyone, housing is a part of that conversation. But learning curves been very steep since I got on council in the fall. But like I knew, like personally, because of area interest, that like infrastructure was an issue. But as we got into like asset management and kind of looking at some capital projects coming down the pipe, like submarine water line and these kind of things, the costs of infrastructure are not going up incrementally; they're going up like astronomically. So like it is like fiscally prudent for our city to not go out, to go up, right? So so infill is, well, housing is one part of it, but it's like fiscal solvency of your city. And going to your point there about not thinking of me, it's not going to affect me, right? I'm thinking, can my kids afford to live here?
Exactly.
Can my kids afford to live here, right?
Exactly.
Like this is multi-generational thinking when it comes to like infrastructure and assets. So because decisions we make now in the next 10 years are going to affect the next 50, 60, right?
Foresight's important, right?
Yeah, like everyone looks at Detroit like it was that was like carrying the coal mine, right? That's a prime example of what happens when you don't think long term about your city financially. Was infill, was that a hard conversation? Yes. We had people crying last week at council, right? Because the spaces that we're talking about using are very important to them for various different ways. Mm-hmm. I'm not discounting that.
No, absolutely not.
But when you have to weigh that against this long-term vision, it's not a hard city decision. It's a hard decision personally to make, right? Because you're affecting people and in a way that is real in real time. But it's not hard to make that decision looking at the whole timeline, looking past myself, and like, is this going to be sustainable generationally? And that's what you're teeing up when you talk, because these places don't go away. You build a neighborhood, it's there for 50, 60, 80, 100 years.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's the people living there are going to change 3, 4, 5 times. No one's going to remember this in 30 years. So, thinking long term, how does it affect a city? That's hard to do when people want their immediate thing.
And I totally get that, because being in the position where you're the one that's making that decision can sometimes make you a little bit unpopular with the, but people have to realize at the end of the day, that's what you're elected to do, right? You're elected to make the decisions that are going to be better for the community as a whole, not just one individual. And I have my home. I don't have to worry about if I can afford a house. I have a house, right? But I have young children like yourself, and I would like them to maybe have at least the prospect of living here at some point in time as they get older, or be able to afford a house and not have to wait for me to die to inherit one. You know what I mean? It's one of those things, but when you look at it, it's, and just I remember, I'm 51, so the first house I built, I was 25 years old, and I paid $104,000 for it, and it was a brand new home that was built. You couldn't get a tool shed for $104,000 now. So, prices, obviously, real estate increases, and, the costs are astronomical. And it's sort of, young people now in their 20s and 30s are kind of looking at this, well, how am I going to possibly be able to do this? Well, again, we're going to have to make sacrifices. And if that means that I give up a piece of my view to do that, or if, I have to walk a little bit further to take my dog for a walk, that's what I'm going to have to do. And like I said, that's not discounting what people, how people feel about these things. I understand it. One of the great things about being up here is that you have the ability to do those things. It's like, well, it's a cool place to live. We have places where we can run our dogs in the wilderness, and it's just right outside of town. But we have to adjust, right? If we want to survive as a community. Yeah,
we can't ignore, the reality of what's occurring, right? The problem is like, as I said, like, folks don't think about the longer term stuff, nor should they. They're not politicians. They're not policy people. They're not. They're living in their life, and they're going to be affected in their home, which is hugely, it's hugely impactful for them. It's thinking the longer term is, this is the hardest part of the job so far. It's like everyone asks, there's no real hard conversations. There's been no real discourse yet on council, and no big fights. Nothing really of.
Well, I think that decision that was just with, developing those areas. I think everybody was pretty much on board with that on the council, I would assume.
Yeah. There was an amendment proposed to proll one of those chunks out for various reasons, and I opposed that along with 4 other people, so the amendment didn't pass. But for me, it was not around the validity of that space being special or unique use to people. It was I'm all about precedent. Like if you do it once and you're saying
Yeah.
this is the reason we'll change things, right? And my argument on that one was like, I agree the points that were brought up about the space being special or unique in different ways.
Right.
I'm not ignoring that fact, but what makes that any different than the other issues you brought up about how the other spaces were special to other people, right?
Well, so then
Yeah, it's like so if we're gonna change, then let's change it for all of them, right? But if that's the case, then we don't do anything.
Well, you open that door at the end of the day. That's
So I'm I want to make sure that what we're doing is not setting a precedent that's going to set us up for failure long term, right? But which means that you got to do hard decisions, right? So, but that was a good example, I think, of it had an amendment, we had a debate, it didn't pass, and then so we voted on the original amendment, which was all the infill, and it passed unanimously. So that was, I think, a good example. We'll see how long it lasts the whole 4 years, but having a healthy debate, but in the end agreeing that we had to do something. So
ultimately, that's what it comes down to. I mean, and like when we look at politics now, I mean, this has been a kind of a unique situation over the last 4 years because of COVID and whatnot. But I mean, ultimately, we've seen a lot of things like COVID changed the world at the end of the day, and we have our healthcare across the country's in crisis. I mean, a lot of it because of staff shortages and whatnot. But as a whole, we have to adapt, and we have to put people in place in politics that are going to be willing to make those decisions. And sometimes we may not like, even if I voted for you, I may not like every decision that you make. But the reality of it is, if I'm going to vote you into city council, which I did, just not trying to butter you up here or anything, but I did vote for you because I wanted people, I want to know that I'm voting for people who are actually going to do something. And I understand that we want to be sympathetic, but going from sympathy to pandering is a situation where we don't get anything done, right? And whether we're too negative or we're pandering, too much argument, at the end of the day, we need to make changes, and we need to all kind of come to the realization that our lives are going to change a little bit, in the future. We're coming into some hard economic times. We need to make adjustments, and we may have to make sacrifices that are going to make this community viable for us now, and possibly viable, well, hopefully even more viable for our children.
Yeah, like I know it's not a city issue, but like the recent news story about GNBT internally having, I think, 1.5% or almost 2% remote work. But you look at nationally, and like it's so far off what the national stats are showing for remote work. You're like, okay, so what's not working here, right?
Yeah.
And in the next breath, you talk about high vacancy in territorial government. You're like, because labor is mobile. It's not just nurses. It's like labor is in the driver's seat when it comes to like having the ability to jump job to job, right? If they don't like where they are, they'll leave. They're not going to sit there and fight you for remote work. If you say, no, you're not doing it, like fine, you just leave.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a different universe than it was even a couple of years ago.
For sure.
So yeah, being more adaptable and encouraging people to come here. Like, we are not a cheap place to live, and I don't think we ever will be, but we can make it more affordable.
Well, my sister came here like 32 years ago as a nurse. And back then, the reason she came here, I mean, she could have got a job anywhere, pretty much the States, anywhere in Canada. The reason she came here is because, well, she was going to come here for 1 year because the packages that were put in place to incentivize them to come here, the salaries and the housing allowances and all that kind of stuff were so huge. It made such a huge difference. But that's not the case anymore now.
No, it's I'll speak more private sector because that's more my jam. But employers have a hard time attracting folks. But what I've seen is a shift. People there's a lot of effort, and I can't hire anybody, whatever. And now the employers are starting to realize in town, you're seeing a lot of staff housing, right? So a lot of the service providers, a lot of the airlines, they have staff housing. Speaking of pressure on housing, it's because now instead of that house, it's not just you that are competing for it. It's a company that's going to buy it and put 6 of their staff in there.
Yeah.
Because this is the only way they retain staff now is they. Like, we are essentially like a Jasper and Banff now. Like, housing is almost something you need to provide if you want employees to come, right? So like just the whole way it was before when we first came here, right? You came, found your own place. Your employer, you never had a conversation about housing your employer. That was just your problem to solve. Mm-hmm. Now most employers, if they don't provide or have some conversation or incentive around housing, they can't get anybody, right? So it's yeah. So
no, but you know what? Like, I can speak to that because I mean, the first house that Liv and I bought together. It was we actually bought a place in Northlands. It was one of those brand new places that they just put in there, but we only planned to be there a short time, and I think we paid roughly about $300,000 for that, which was that's super cheap for here, right? Yeah. But we lived in it for a year, and it sold for $354. We had a bidding war going on, and ultimately, the buyer actually fell through, and the person that came in and bought it cash with it, just looked at it once, bought it cash, and that's why he bought it. Staff housing.
Yeah.
Right. He needed a place to put his employees. Simple as that.
Yeah. So there's so if we don't, so that's the other part, right? It's like, how do you like, let's say housing being multifaceted, right? Like I have a 4-bed condo which I've rented out for years. Recently over COVID, I had a local kind of someone lives here and works here renting it, but it's always been a corporate rental. It's like it's going back that now because it's a 4-bedroom place, and that like I can rent it in 5 seconds because these companies want staff
such
housing,
demand,
right?
yeah.
And they're willing to move quicker, like your house, right? They're willing to move quicker than if say like a regular tenant.
No conditions, no nothing. Here's your money. Thank you very much. And it's as simple as that.
So yeah, it's really so when you got that competition out in the market, this is why vacancy is good, because we shouldn't have companies competing with people for housing, but that's what's happening because we forced the supply so short. I think it was really telling. Like we have no lots available for residential sale in the whole city of Yellowknife. The lead time to bring new lots online is going to take us like years, right? So like this is not a quick solution. Like the last lot in Grace Lake just sold, and that process started over 10 years ago. Wow. So like the time from when like the idea starts to when it's like surveyed and designed and wrote, like these are massive lead times, right? So to say we're kind of behind the 8 ball is not subtle, but you got to start somewhere, right? The best time to start.
For sure.
Yeah.
We have to. Yeah. We have to make adjustments. And I mean, right now, my business partner here at the gym, Scott, he's been trying to buy a house now for almost a year, and every property that he looks at or puts a bid on, it's gone instantly. And there's a bid, like, some people are bidding 20,000, 30,000 over asking, and no conditions, because it's so difficult to buy a house here right now.
Yeah. So like this is like a balanced market is better for everybody, right? Obviously sellers want that market, they want a hot market, right? Yeah. But like the idea of putting an offer on a property with no conditions, it's like insane. As a real estate guy, that terrifies me, right? It terrifies me, because then you're taking all that risk without knowing anything about the place, right?
No inspection, nothing on the
no, there's like financially ruinous things that can occur in a property. This is what due diligence is for, right? So yeah, higher vacancy, a higher supply of houses for sale. Like this is good for everyone. It's a healthy balanced market is good for everybody. It's good for owners, it's good for renters, it's good for buyers. But right now it's not that, because we've just constricted the supply, not purposely. We just through poor policies and processes and lack of long-term thinking. Like we haven't prepped. So yeah, it's short-term pain, but long-term I think
it's one of the things, like you even see him talking about on a federal, like Pierre Poilievre, I've seen him talking about this, and just the red tape that a lot of times you're going through with cities and the people and permits not being issued and how long it takes. And it seems like an odd thing when you're in a country like Canada that's got so much unused land, but a lot of times it's just, there's more to it than that. And that's what people, unfortunately, they don't get to see that. I mean, and they don't want to see that, like you said, because at the end of the day, as an individual walking around, and if I'm buying a house, I don't want to get into you
don't care why. You just want.
I just want to buy a house. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Like I said, go back when I started, like building things is really, really hard. And like I got to give kudos, like Yellowknife relative to a lot of places. The red tape, there's still a lot of barriers there to building and kind of really getting housing moving. We can improve a lot of things, but relatively compared to like a Toronto or thing, we are nowhere near as bureaucratic and red tapey as those places. Still things to work on, but it is much more nimble here.
I think that and again, it comes down to getting the right people in, and one of the reasons when you told me you were running for city council, one of the things I liked was the fact that you had this knowledge, is that you were in the industry, you knew the properties, you know properties, you know what you're talking about when it comes to this area, and it's an important area, like I said, because I mean ultimately, what does the city do? It provides housing, it maintains the streets. These are the important things, and they all kind of circle around where we live at the end of the day. That's what it's about. So I think we're heading in the sort of a right direction.
Yeah, I think so. I'm optimistic. I wouldn't run for council if I thought it was all down the dumps. Like we've had some good progress before I got council, the community plan, the zoning bylaw. But like I said, there's a ton of like smaller but not quite as sexy changes we can do. We can start moving the needle a little bit.
It's fixable though, right? And that's the thing. I mean, these are fixable things. It's going to take time, but
and like people might disagree with my opinion on things, but they're just gonna know what it is. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm never gonna waffle on in the middle. I'll give you the my
Well, you're
thoughts
never
on
going to
things.
get everyone to, I mean, at the end of the day, no matter what you do, and I mean that's whether it's business, politics, or life in general. No matter what you do, someone's not going to agree with what you're doing. You're going to upset somebody, and that's you just have
Yeah.
to make the decisions that you think are best for the city, and ultimately, look at the community as a whole rather than, like you said. I mean, we can't. As much as I sympathize with the individual that has a lifestyle that they built up around the way their property is now and the way the city is now, it's unfortunate that that's going to change. But the reality, I'm sure at some point in time in Toronto you could go for a nature walk, but
Yeah.
things change.
And then and the point is like, is when we say when I say things like it'll change, this is over time, right?
Yes.
Things don't nothing happens instantly. So like over time, our community will change. So changing the zoning bylaw, doing the infill lots, right? People got very upset, but I think there's a perception that it's going to change tomorrow, and that's not how like homes and
No, I
properties
looked out the window. There's no one building behind me
no,
yet.
no. Like it'll yeah. It's incremental. It's not instantaneous, right?
Yeah.
So will neighborhoods change? Yes. Is it gonna be tomorrow? No. Like this is decades and decades and decades of time to really change, like to make it unrecognizable from what it is now. But it won't be instant. Like it is, things evolve naturally as kind of neighborhood shift and motivation shift, economy shift.
It's like anything though, right? I mean, like when we talk about one of the issues that's been really, really prevalent lately has been the homelessness and whatnot, and even if you do come up we do come up with plans that can solve this issue in the long run and help everyone that's involved and help the people. It's not gonna again. It's not something you're not just gonna walk down the street one day and there's not gonna be any homeless there.
No.
It doesn't work. Life just doesn't happen that way, and people have to realize they have to be patient and let the process kind of happen.
Yeah, yeah. I would love to solve problems instantly. That would like, of course. But it's like, yeah, once you get into a thing, you see how complex it is. There's so many inputs into kind of that homeless or hard to house folks in Yellowknife. There's the addictions part, there's the generational trauma part, there's the physical housing to have them in, there's the access to programs if they want to get kind of off the addiction path there. Like but there's so many different bits in there, got Safe Ride that goes and picks people up and then their car breaks down. That doesn't work for 2 weeks. Or, there's always we're so small too that like one little thing changes and things don't work the same way.
The impact, yeah.
Yeah, it's, so multiple things over time, doing little incremental changes will fix these things or help them. I don't think there's any fixing.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, being realistic, if as I think about going into the political arena, I mean, I'm not delusional. I don't think I'm going to walk in and start solving issues that have been, existed for a very long time. But at the end of the day, it's just, can we kind of chip away at things and start to improve the situation and help people along the roads, and whether that's, like I said, whether that's homelessness, housing, daycare, or healthcare, whatever, we need to make the adjustments, because like I said, I mean, a lot of it, and we can't blame everything on COVID, because everyone wants to blame everything on COVID now because it's the easiest thing to do. But it did definitely have an impact, right? I mean, especially on healthcare, and the solutions are there, and I think there's people intelligent enough to come up with those solutions. But again, it's not going to be instant. Unfortunately, a pandemic caused a lot of instant, problems. But solving those problems is not quite that simple.
Well, I think we've already started to forget, which was my worry, was what COVID was great for is it showed us how nimble we can be if we need to be, or I'll rephrase that, if we want to be.
Yes.
Right. A lot of the times, we don't empower. So no one has ill will. I've never met any single person, government, industry, that has ill will. Right. They different opinions on things, but they don't mean.
They're not trying to hurt anyone at the end of the day.
But trying to we often know how to solve a thing. We just don't empower people to solve the problem. Like I know with the day shelter, which is now the temporary one over there, I got engaged on that by some very smart folks, but I never felt like they were empowered to really solve the problem. They were just they were told to solve a problem, given no power to make decisions, right? So that kind of drew out for a couple of years. We ended up with the APCOs and whatever, which is fine. But that whole process really showed me it's like there's a consequence to not letting really super motivated, smart people empower them to solve the problem, right?
Yeah.
It's like in COVID, that's what we did, was we empowered people. We're just we didn't have the bandwidth and the time to, say, figure it out. And we let them figure it out, right? We gave them the ability to do it. Didn't always work. But sometimes just get in our own way, right? We don't.
Well, like I said, I mean, the end solution was pretty simple at the end of the day. And it was, I think it was a private citizen who actually came up with the ultimate the ultimate solution and provided it. And but like you said, I mean, we had a couple of the people that worked heavily on that issue from the government standpoint. Our gym members here, and I've had conversations with them, and like they couldn't like you said, they couldn't really do anything. I mean, they didn't have the power.
So I engaged in the spring of 2020 on the day shelter specifically. It's a good example. I suggested a solution, which was, they could describe the problem and just like, the solution to that problem doesn't exist in the way you think it does. You should look at prefab structures. Here's the 4 or 5 companies in Alberta that do that, right? And you need to order it tomorrow, right? That was like that. Yeah. And it wasn't just like found way after the fact, but it was like multiple folks internally, externally, essentially framed it the same way. And they got there. It just took them 2 years to get there because they didn't just let people solve the problem, right? Then they had different fingers in different pots, and it got political, and it got, it got off track from solving the actual problem which just people need to be inside and warm and safe during the day. And so we got away from that. Like, if they just empower people to solve that problem, it would have been solved.
It would have been solved
way sooner than it was. Yeah. And they got there eventually. And in the end, it was because they finally said, fine, just, we need to solve it now. And they actually empowered people who then reached out to the few folks that could solve that problem, and they solved it, right?
Very quickly at the end of the day.
Time or money, right? Like, I've heard some complaints since that, like, that was supposed to be X and it cost Y. And it was like, well, because you wanted it tomorrow. That's, If
you want something to happen tomorrow, and at the end of the day, that's what happened. Of course, there was so much red tape, I guess, leading up to it, and it took so long to solve. And then okay, it's going to be winter now.
So it cost quite it did cost more in the end. But what I saw being a private sector guy is I saw a bunch of private sector companies drop everything on their plate and completely solve a problem. Right now, like that's a great place to live, where people will do that, right? Because now did it cost more? Of course, it costs more, right?
For sure.
But the willingness to do that, right, to just solve that problem, was there. It was just
because there's people's lives at stake at the end of the day. I mean, like you said, we need to give. You've got these people, and for whatever reason, and we don't know everybody's story at the end of the day and why they're on the street and how they got there. But what we do know is a human being deserves to be inside in the winter and not freeze to death, right? And then have a warm, safe place that they can go to, right? And our community. One thing I like about this community, and I've seen it time and time again, is when when push comes to shove, everyone will step up. They'll do what they have to do.
I guess it's more about housing as you say it, but it's usually not a problem of having the space or the thing. It's the access to it, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, we have Aspen, a federally owned apartment building. It's 36 units sitting empty right now, right? That's red tape. That's bureaucracy. That practically that is housing for 36 people today.
Yeah.
Right. But because of the structures we have and the processes we have. Right, the city is working on moving that to eventually to an NGO which can use it for housing, but like that whole process has been like the bit I've been involved with it. It's been super frustrating, right? Because like I'm a practical guy.
Yeah.
I see an empty thing, I just want to fill it up, right? Whereas there's different motivations for various valid reasons.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's we often don't have. We have the stuff.
Well, you got 35 people over here that need housing. You got I got a place to put 35 people. It seems quite simple. But But at the end of the day, it's not.
Yeah, it's been and then you got capacity. Government's running on fumes. You got not staff. NGOs are just burnt right out from running over COVID, but generally have no staff either, right? So no one has any ability to do more stuff, right? So even though I say simply 36 units sitting there, like that requires someone to like find staff and manage clients, and like no one has the ability to do that. It's just and but I like to focus on the physical building part and then and find the bits to run it.
Well, I mean that's and like I said, when I saw that when I read the article about your last council meeting when you guys kind of made that decision to open these properties up, I mean the point that you made was so valid, because everything that we've talked about really comes down to people. We need people. Right. Yeah. Well, we can't bring people here if we don't have a place to put them, and that's the reality. I'm not. Would you like to move here, sir? Well, but unfortunately, we don't have anywhere for you to live when you get here. But it sounds silly, but at the end of the day, it's a reality.
Yeah, and we need all of it. I know when we started the city council campaign, I didn't say affordable housing in any of my press releases or stuff we're talking about. I said housing, and I got asked by a reporter. They're like, "Oh, so you don't support I don't know how to phrase when support, but it's like obviously you're not for affordable housing." And I was like, I'm for all, like we need all of it. We need affordable housing, we need non-market housing, which is your housing corps and your NGOs, but we also need like the obnoxious large house, on the water. Like because a doctor will come here because of that, right? Like it is. You
Well,
just,
this
you
is the
just,
thing
you
that
just,
people don't consider.
You just need everything, right?
Yeah.
We need all options, and none right now exist. So, starting to get that process going and getting those going, it's like, it's a long game, right? We're not going to solve it tomorrow.
Well, I mean, that's funny you said that, because there's a doctor that recently moved into my neighborhood, and he's just down the road from me, and he's got a house that you could put my house inside of, and he drives a Porsche and all these other things, and you can look at that, but the reality of it is he's obviously a successful person. He built a practice up somewhere else, and he became successful to that point. And now we've said, okay, would you like to move here? Well, he's not going to leave his nice home that he built for his family and come up here and live in a tool shed. He wants a nice house to live in, right? He wants a place to put where he can put his Porsche. And you know what? I don't have a problem with that, because at the end of the day, when I see someone who's successful like that, or more successful than I am financially, I say, great, good for you. You know what? You put the time in. I knew a guy down in Grand Prairie there, and he's got 125 rental properties. He's everyone thought he's got a Lamborghini, he's got this, he's got that. I begrudge him none of that, because I know that this guy literally worked 12-hour days, 7 days a week to make this happen. He's a major real estate agent down there. He's got a ton of people under him. He's been doing it his entire life. And you know what? If he ended up with a Lamborghini, you can too. You just got to do the work, right? So at the end of the day, I mean, whatever your thoughts on those things, I mean, there's going to be all types of individuals that come into the city. Some of them are going to be just regular people. Some are going to be, like you said, doctors and whatever, or executives. Because at the end, even business people that move here for whatever reason, if we want to improve our economy and we want to have economic growth, we want everybody to be able to come here. So yeah, we're going to need all types of housing. That makes perfect sense to me, Rob. But I guess for some people, it is a struggle, but it's reality. We live in a capitalist society, and that's the way it kind of runs.
Like I was saying earlier, like the CD motel conversion I'm doing, give it end of summer this year, and it'll be a completely different place, right?
Yeah.
And I can kind of, doing good things for your community and doing things that are, obviously it's my business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't need to be mutually exclusive from good
Nope.
business practices, right?
Nope.
Like I can do all these things, right? I can improve my community, and I think I am by taking my life savings and investing them in my community.
I thought that was phenomenal when you bought that.
Yeah, I think it's it's hard. There's many easier ways I could have invested that cash than trying to do this very large project. But you can do both things. I think you can invest in your community. You can make a living, and you can improve it. Like civically, you can improve the place. So. I don't think they're all mutually exclusive. I think you can do multiple things at once.
No, I mean I agree with you 100%. And again, that particular property was an eyesore. It was.
Well, it's still a little rough looking.
No, but I mean what I mean is that's going to change in time, right?
Yeah.
I mean that's the goal, right? It's not going to happen overnight, but we know it's headed in the right direction now. It's also going to provide housing for people. It's going to give people the opportunity to have an option to live in their own space and not have to pay an absolute arm and a leg to have that space. And it's removing some of the seedier element from the city. All these things are positives, right? And if you end up making some money on that, well, that's a great thing. That's how our system works, right? In my opinion, I think it's great to see someone actually taking the time to invest in our city and make positive changes.
Yeah, well, TBD. It's assuming you get it all done. So.
I mean, I think you're on the right road. I mean, from what I've seen, like even like I said, the photos that I saw. I mean, personally, if I was a single guy here working, and I had a choice between renting a bedroom for $1,000 or have my own space like that, and I would most certainly be interested in doing that, right? So, but I want to thank you for coming on today. It was a great chat, and I hope we maybe cleared up some thoughts for people and some of the confusion that happened. Because, I mean, it's like you said, it's such a complicated process, and I think a lot of people don't understand why it takes so long to make things happen. And, even a little bit of insight here and there, will be helpful, right? So, I mean, we're going to bring the issues that are in the community to put it in people's attention and kind of give them the opportunity to maybe understand a little bit better.
Yeah, and I encourage folks, like it's council@yellowknife.ca, so you can email anytime if you've got any civic questions or complaints or comments. And I'm always happy to chat. Folks can reach out. You can find me online. So
that's awesome. Thanks, Rob, so much.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, buddy.